Welcome back to M&A. Jim McVaney is with us, Kinetic Solutions Group. He's a former Senior Director of Federal Relations and Policy at Bayer AG and is such mastermind of one of the largest corporate acquisitions in history. Hi, how are you?
I'm well, how are you?
I'm very good, Jim. So obviously we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the US elections.
Sure.
Because there's some time we have to digest all of this. I guess there's been audible sigh of relief worldwide when Pennsylvania was called and brought the 46th President of the United States across the finish line. Joe Biden will be the president. I guess we have to hold on a little bit. Legal battles looming still in the room, although everybody doubts that the Supreme Court or even lower courts will rule in favor of the sitting president, Donald Trump. But maybe there will be social unrest. The Electoral College is not 100% bound to stick to the vote. The Senate might remain with a Republican majority, making lawmaking a tough business going forward, I guess. We reach you in the nation's capital. What is your current take on the outcome of the elections influencing M&A?
Well, that's a long topic. Specifically to the elections, I think you captured it pretty well. No unbiased advisor or viewer at this point can expect that President Trump will be able to hold on and return for a second term. The recounts that are underway are highly unlikely to change the outcomes in those states: Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin. I grew up in Georgia, so I know it fairly well. It's going to be an intense political battleground over the next 2 months as those 2 Senate seats are again voted upon, but I do expect that Republicans, as you indicated, Republicans will end up with control of the Senate. So that sets up a landscape with President Biden coming in with a new administration, with a new approach to governing from President Trump, and a divided Congress in the Senate in Republican hands and the House in Democratic hands. So from an M&A perspective, I see changes and I see similarities. And if you look at it from a domestic M&A perspective or a cross-border inbound M&A perspective, that's where there's going to be, I think, large differences. Joe Biden has very much been an internationalist. He has always sought to build strong ties with Europe in his time as vice president, as well as in the Senate. And I expect that will continue and in an elevated role. But for non-EU US deals, things may not change that much.
Tell us a little bit more, because obviously we are more interested in the transatlantic situation than anything else, because there's been some irritation in the past 4 years in that concern. Do you think, even though, as I pointed out, lawmaking is not getting that much easier going forward from January, what are the touch points where we can expect that things really change to the better?
Well, this is probably stating the obvious, but I don't think that Joe Biden is going to operate in as unpredictable a manner as Donald Trump has over the last 4 years. There was consternation within the Republican Party and with some of Trump's allies on how he approached the US-EU relationship. And particularly when the general understanding was that Trump's objective was to marginalize China, but instead of trying to build a coalition with the European nations and European companies who invest in the United States, to focus on trying to make China a better actor under WTO rules. President Trump seemed to agitate with some allies more than agitate with some allies in Europe that could have been helpful in building a coalition to get China to abide by the rules. I think President Biden will recognize that that's an opportunity to rebuild some relationships for many reasons, including gaining more trade across the Atlantic, more deals to be done potentially, but more importantly, from the U.S. perspective, to have a unified front in approaching China on where it may be operating outside the bounds of international M&A rules.
Of course, Jim, we're very early talking about a cabinet, Biden cabinet, but still, of course, our audience today is very interested in particularly two posts, two secretaries, namely DOJ, Department of Justice, obviously, but as well the Department of Treasury. What are your expectations going forward from this point right now?
So we'll start with DOJ. I think the front runner would probably be Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar. She, you may recall, ran in the Democratic primary for the nomination, did not get it, but she acquitted herself very well. She is an experienced hand on the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. She has been engaged in oversight of M&A deals from that position. And most importantly, she comes from a state that has a Democratic governor, because any vacant seats from a state in the Senate can be filled by the governor. And say in the case of Massachusetts and Elizabeth Warren, Massachusetts currently has a Republican governor. Senator Warren has expressed desire to become the Treasury Secretary, but that would further tip the balance of power in the Senate to the Republicans if she were to vacate that seat for Treasury, which I'll come back to in a second, but just to say, I don't think she will be tapped for that. So back to DOJ, I think Senator Klobuchar has the inside track on becoming Attorney General. If that doesn't happen, there are a couple governors out there that could be potential options. One is Andy Beshear from Kentucky. He was, I believe, Attorney General in the state of Kentucky, has a background in roles that would be precursors to being Attorney General. And then maybe an outside choice could be Janet Mills, the governor from Maine, though she's a little bit further along in her career, and they may want somebody a little younger for that role. But if I were a betting man in this world on these type things, I would pick Senator Klobuchar.
Treasury, you wanted to dig in a little bit deeper because Elizabeth Warren might be, for a lot of people involved in M&A in the United States, rather scary figure belonging to the left, obviously, and to the left kind of almost populist, you might say, movement in the US, the Bernie Sanders faction. So you're not expecting her to be the next Treasury Secretary. Who's it going to be?
That's a really good question. I think that Warren would have been an unlikely choice, even without these circumstances that I just discussed, for Biden, because she is a very polarizing figure that is a key critical post in the administration. And you're absolutely right. From a corporate perspective, from the perspective of getting deals done, she would likely be problematic. Having said that, and having said that I don't think she has a track on it, I don't know who would be the second or third choice at this point. But I would say that for the Democratic base right now, Joe Biden needs to find someone who has a track record of being tough on corporations generally, and particularly on energy companies. But that's not other than in M&A, a Treasury, that ability to impact specific sectors of the economy doesn't allow for energy or others to be, I'll say, picked upon. But it does when it comes to M&A, because Treasury, from a M&A and CFIUS or securities perspective, plays a significant role.
Let us talk about the regulatory framework a little bit as well, because in the time of COVID, we have the impression that, in a sense, M&A activities are much, much harder to achieve in the time of crises. I would like you to refer a little bit to the ramifications that are awaiting us, even with a new administration, because we pointed out a lot of positive things coming. But on the regulatory side, we, I guess, cannot expect quick changes, right? Rather, to the contrary, even?
No, I wouldn't expect quick changes with regard to M&A. Joe Biden's first focus is going to be establishing his response to the pandemic. And that will be an all hands on deck, full team effort to get those policies in place. That doesn't mean that the selection of key individuals won't be taking place in the background at Treasury, at DOJ. But most of what you're going to be hearing are names and then the COVID key role activities. But to your point, what we saw back in the spring with the availability of PPE in so many countries allowed for a protectionist approach to further emerge with regard to medical supplies and the ability to respond to any health crisis like this. So a couple years ago, there was an update to the laws that govern inbound M&A and the committee on and how the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS, is responsible for overseeing those deals. It widely opened the aperture to allow for the committee to be more aggressive in looking at virtually any deal. And now with the pandemic and the PPE shortage that we saw earlier in the year, I think that will be upfront on so many deals that relate to chemicals, medical supplies, and other things that would not have been swept up in the past.
The overall picture of the role of national security reviews on covered transactions, do you expect any changes at that front? I mean, you referred a little bit to CFIUS already.
No, I think regardless of who won the election, there was going to be a much more aggressive approach to overseeing inbound investment. The FIRMA, Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act that passed in 2018 did really redefine how, what transactions can be reviewed, the process for reviewing them, the definitions for what is a passive and non-passive investor, and also allowed for DOJ to impose, well, for the government to impose fees for simply filing your application to get through the process. And there were, I believe the regulations came out last year or maybe earlier this year that defined which countries were exempt. I don't recall that, I know that Germany was not, I don't recall how many EU countries were exempt, but I don't think, excluding Ireland and the UK, I don't believe any other UK countries were exempt. So again, the rules become much more expansive, but also much more specific at the same time. And again, with the overlay of what the world has gone through over the last 9 months, you can find security concerns behind or under any rock and behind every tree.
We are still in the phase, and of course, I have to ask you that because everybody's still interested in the Monsanto acquisition, Monsanto buyer, of course, where you had a role of a kind of, may I call it chief architect? Would that be appropriate?
I wouldn't go that far. my role was really managing the political risk of in the U.S. on the deal. You know, it was a massive deal, biggest all cash transaction in history, largest foreign direct investment in the United States. A great deal to work on. And there was a lot of logic to it from its inception. And when you do something that is that big, and when it involves a company like Monsanto that had the history it did, there's always a lot of, I'd say, legwork that's involved outside of the interface between the companies and the Department of Justice, but just to try and build understanding and support for the deal amongst policymakers. And that was my role, was to lead that initiative. Yeah. Which was a lot of fun. I get asked the question all the time, do you think it was a good deal? I think it was a smart move. The only thing I can say is that I think the market is sending this fairly strong signal on whether it was a good deal or a bad deal at this point.
Obviously, you cannot disclose non-public information here at that point, but this was exactly the question I would like to ask with a little distance to, I guess, a hard-working phase in your life, because that wasn't easy, obviously. There are a lot of people on our side of the Atlantic doubt that it was a good deal. First off, the general public is in parts allergic towards Monsanto, obviously, for the reasons you know, and everybody knows who's listening to us right now. But at the same time, think, well, with penalties unseen, unheard of, and with the overall volume of the business, maybe after all, it wasn't that good, but you stick to the answer that the markets give the appropriate answer to that, right?
Absolutely. You know, if you look at the two technologies and the research platforms that each company brought to the table, it made a lot of sense. But a lot of water has flown under the bridge before or since then, since the deal was announced, and certainly till today, and certainly over the last year. And ultimately, the market has rewarded companies that have been able to adapt to that and have made good decisions. And we are where we are, and it may be someplace else in a couple of years.
If you look at huge mergers in the past in the auto industry, for instance, Daimler Chrysler, that didn't work at the end of the day. Is this due to different industries, or is it, if you look at it from a bird's eye perspective, something that in the case of Bayer was managed so much better?
Well, I think cultural differences are something that cannot be ignored in any cross-border deal, or even domestic deals between two companies with different cultural, corporate cultures. I think you're seeing some of that at play here. You mentioned autos, and that's an area that will be interesting to watch during the next few years of the Biden administration. I would expect that President Biden will take a very different approach than President Trump has. And because of labor's role with President Biden, it's more likely that I could see deals being done in that space. But whether they work out or not, you know, your point on Daimler and Chrysler coming together, there are so many external market forces that can overwhelm good governance and good strategy. And people will always be held accountable for their mistakes or those exogenous impacts when they're running companies and doing deals at scope. So don't have a whole lot more color to add on that, but it will be fascinating to watch the economic recovery and the opportunities that have emerged in the new post-pandemic environment and a Biden administration.
Would you say, with all said, the huge mergers we referred to, that this is due to ramifications on the regulatory side, but as well on the political side? And if you look at how the pandemic will play out going forward. We don't know that yet at this moment, of course. That the era of huge corporate mergers, transatlantic, worldwide, is at a halt right now, and that we will see much more smaller business from here on?
I think that's a good assessment. Certainly easier to do smaller deals than these big mega deals that we've been talking about. As I said before, I can see an environment where the next administration is seeking to build coalitions across the Atlantic. So from that perspective, I can see the opportunity for more mega deals to go through. On the flip side, the process in the US and in the EU, for that matter, appears to have become more politicized, even pre-Trump administration. Deals are taking longer to get done than they were before the pandemic. They just get more scrutiny, and there's more political interference, which is why I have a job, in part, is to help obviate those political problems. But I don't see that ebbing too much. I think it will continue. To the degree that it continues, will be driven by who's in power in the United States, and those deals that the supporters of that president will want to see either blocked or at least delayed.
What will become with regard to the UK? Boris Johnson these days doesn't seem to have that many friends anymore. Plus, what will the market look like in China? Because all eyes obviously are on China, and if the political leadership announces, okay, we go more and more our own ways, and there's less business to be found probably going forward. Those two phenomenons, those two countries, how do you look at business there?
That's a good point on Johnson and the UK. I don't think that Biden will rush to try and strike a deal with the UK, a bilateral, the way Trump was eager to do, in part because of his relationship with Boris Johnson. So they could be hanging out there for a while. I don't think that the transatlantic trade deal is anywhere in the cards in the near future. There is just not general support across the political aisle to see that happen right now. But as I said, I can see a Biden administration going closer back to normal with the EU, and that will put significant pressure on the UK to try and find as rational, I don't know if I can say a rational approach to Brexit. That's rational and Brexit have not really fit together in the last 4 years. So I think that the relationship between the EU and the US can get closer, particularly on corporate trade and corporate deals, because of the opportunity to try and rein in China.
A word to concerning China, a little more probably, if you have something for us going forward with the China business.
Well, one of the things that is we're seeing now, we've seen over the last 4 years, is that the U.S. has a new expanded toolbox for countering what we believe are trade indiscretions, and they've been used particularly against China. Tariffs were off the table for 30 years, and now they're front and center. And I think that those tools will remain in the Biden toolbox as he goes forward. Non-tariff trade barriers, SPS, complications on imports will remain at the forefront. China has been particularly good at slowing approvals of new technologies over the years into their market, and the U.S. has really not exhausted its full set of tools in that realm. So again, there are many ways to complicate trade that we haven't really dug that deeply into in the U.S., but everything seems to be on the table.
Thank you so much at that point, Jim. I mean, I can't let you go before I ask you the question. Would it be fair to say that after looking maybe around the world, or a big portion of the world going forward, the M&A business with the new U.S. administration, that you are relatively optimistic for business perspective and vision?
I am. The factor of virtually free money and governments now willing, and the U.S. government about to spend trillions more and potentially trillions on top of that more to stimulate the economy. I'm encouraged by the opportunities. I do think that the clean tech sector is going to be particularly active, and that could be an area for a lot of cross-border M&A. I could certainly see the large power industry companies, the Siemens, GE, Vestas, and so on and so forth, having a greater interest in investing in the United States. And as I expect the U.S. to focus more on carbon mitigation, there's a natural opportunity for those companies as well as others that play in that space. So the best thing that can happen is greater predictability. And I think we will see that, but that may be just, it may not be back to the norm of 7 or 8 years ago, but in comparison to the last few years, I think we'll see a lot more predictability.
Thank you so much. At this point, Jim McVaney, Kinetic Solutions Group, former Senior Director of Federal Relations and Policy at Bayer. Thank you for speaking with us for our M&A conference here in Frankfurt in Germany. Thanks.
Thank you, Andreas.